Shabbat Shalom. This is Elder Shabar Ben Lewi of KYCN. This week, our regular Rod of Iron broadcast has been replaced with a Kingdom Report on the defense of the 1994 crime bill by Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden. To our Rod of Iron listening audience and our YouTube subscribers, we ask for your patience as we resolve the transitioning of KYCNradio.com to a new and greater streaming and licensing platform, Live 365. Look for a whole new look, an all-new website, and our custom apps for iPhone and Android to make your listening experience with KYCN more accessible and convenient. Now, let's get right to our report.
Biden defends 1994 crime bill.
Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. At the end, comment and let us know what you think. Welcome to the Kingdom Report. I'm Yeshua ben Yeshua of the House of David. In the name of Yahweh Elohim, King of the universe, and Yeshua HaMashiach, also known as Jesus the Christ, Shabbat Shalom. For those of you who are new to the broadcast, the purpose of the Kingdom Report is to analyze news and current events in the light of biblical prophecy.
On Monday, former Vice President Joe Biden stunned a gathering of the Poor People's Campaign Moral Action Congress in Washington by vowing to reverse decades of losses by Democrats in presidential elections across the South. Biden, who leads his presidential rivals by a wide margin, is seeking to accomplish a feat no Democrat has managed since former President Jimmy Carter won the South in 1976. With the exception of Carter and the Clinton campaigns of 1992 and 96, the entire southern region has been swept by Republicans. In the decades following the Kennedy-King connection, which occurred during the general election in 1960, and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the supposed African-American vote has gone overwhelmingly to Democrats. As the current frontrunner and assumed nominee among a crowded field of candidates, Biden looks beyond his party's primary to an upset victory in a region carried handily by President Trump in 2016. At this stage, as the 2020 presidential race unfolds, the fact that the so-called black vote remains the margin of victory among Democrats nationwide looms larger than ever. And if Biden is to win in his own primaries, much less defeat Trump across the South, the solid support of the supposed African-American community is absolutely crucial. But for Democrats, who face significant gains among blacks by President Trump, securing the so-called black vote at its usual 90+% levels is hardly a foregone conclusion. The new challenge presented by Republicans is heightened by the fact that Biden is the author of the now infamous Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act of 1994, which has by all intents and purposes ravaged the so-called black community by the war on drugs and greatly expanded mass incarceration. Biden's iron-fisted legislation, better known as the crime bill, was recently renounced by former President Bill Clinton, who publicly apologized for signing the bill into law. And in perhaps the biggest political blunder thus far in the early stages of the 2020 campaign, Biden predicts a sweep across the South, in which any potential victory for Democrats depends heavily on the so-called black vote. In 1993, Biden addressed the U.S. Senate concerning the so-called urgent need for such severe crime legislation at the time.
We must take back the streets. It doesn't matter whether or not the person that is accosting your son or daughter or my son or daughter, my wife, your husband, my mother, your parents. It doesn't matter whether or not they were deprived as a youth. It It doesn't matter whether or not they had no background that enabled them to become socialized into the fabric of society. It doesn't matter whether or not they're the victims of society. The end result is they're about to knock my mother on the head with a lead pipe, shoot my sister, beat up my wife, take on my sons. So I don't want to ask what made them do this. They must be taken off the street. That's number one. There's a consensus on that. Unless we do something about that cadre of young people, tens of thousands of them, born out of wedlock, without parents, without supervision, without any structure, without any conscience developing, because they literally, I yield myself 3 more minutes, because they literally have not been socialized. They literally have not had an opportunity. We should focus on them now. If we don't, they will, or a portion of them will, become the predators 15 years from now. And Madam President, we have predators on our streets that society has, in fact, in part because of its neglect, created. Again, it does not mean because we created them that we somehow forgive them or do not take them out of society to protect my family and yours from them. They are beyond the pale, many of those people. Beyond the pale. And it's a sad commentary on society. We have no choice but to take them out of society. And the truth is, we don't very well know how to rehabilitate them at that point. So you cannot make rehabilitation a condition for release. That's why in our system, there's the federal system, you serve 85% of your time. It's a shame, but we don't know how to rehabilitate. But there is a consensus, and I will cease. A, we must make the streets safer. I don't care why someone is a malefactor in society. I don't care why someone is antisocial. I don't care why they become a sociopath. We have an obligation to cordon them off from the rest of society, try to help them, try to change their behavior. That's why we do in this bill. We have drug treatment and we have other treatments to try to deal with it. But they are in jail, away from my mother, your husband, our families. But we would be absolutely stupid as a society if we didn't recognize the condition that nurtured those folks still exist, and we must deal with that.
Without question, the language and tone of Biden's remarks at the time make it abundantly clear that his intentions were not toward the betterment of the so-called black community, as he now claims. Inexplicably, rather than joining Clinton in his renunciation, Biden has recently displayed his ulterior motives by actually defending the bill. The former vice president recently doubled down on his politically suicidal claim that the bill was of great benefit to the so-called black community. Last month, Biden presented his pro-crime bill arguments in the second-to-vote primary state of New Hampshire.
You know, there's a whole lot of talk about, Biden and the crime bill. Biden wrote a crime bill that had 3 big things in it. One third of it, $10 billion, was for prevention. I don't know, some of you are old enough, I got made fun of because they said Biden's spending money not fighting crime on prevention. And they had these ads of people dancing in tutus, these big guys, that's all Biden, midnight basketball, all that stuff. Second piece of it was a significant investment in dealing with rational gun policy without violating the Second Amendment. We eliminated assault weapons. We were in a position where we limited the number of bullets that could be in a magazine, background checks that hadn't occurred before, etc. And the third thing was the Violence Against Women Act. But in the process of that, we also set up drug courts so that we could divert people. They should be in treatment, not in jail. Treatment, not in jail.
In his attempts to justify his actions, Biden has stated categorically that the 1994 crime bill did not generate mass incarceration, saying that 92% of inmates were in state prisons rather than the federal prison system. But in reality, the bill offered financial incentives for state prisons to force inmates to serve a minimum of 85% of their sentences, removing the potential for early release based on the discretion formerly held by the state judicial system. In addition, it introduced into law the three strikes rule, creating a mandate for prisoners with 3 violent crimes or drug-related felonies to serve a life sentence without the possibility of parole. The attempts by Biden to dismiss the utter devastation his crime bill brought to the so-called Black community, while at the same time counting on the votes of the very community he ravaged, is just the latest salvo in a long history of monumental exploitation and abuse by so-called elite Democrats and rhinos against the supposed African American people. In his baseless and fear-mongering personal attacks against the president, Biden declared that Trump, quote, poses a fundamental threat to America. And at one point, he claimed that the president is, quote, an existential threat to America. This kind of absurd, scorched earth rhetoric is nothing new to Biden. While running for re-election as vice president in 2012, Biden made the following fear-mongering accusation against Republican presidential candidate Mitt Romney.
Look at what they value and look at their budget and what they're proposing. Romney wants to he said in the first 100 days, he's going to let the big banks once again write their own rules. Unchain Wall Street. They're going to put you all back in chains.
A classic instance of the so-called elite Democrats' blaxploitation for personal political gain. It's no coincidence that the ongoing call in Washington for severe crime legislation expanded in earnest in 1991 in response to the community uprising over the Los Angeles Police Department's savage beating of so-called Black motorist Rodney King and the subsequent acquittals of the rogue officers involved. And in a well-coordinated follow-up move on the part of the deep state-controlled mass media, America witnessed the presence on a massive scale of a new musical genre in, quote, urban music, gangsta rap, beginning with the introduction in 1988 of the Compton, California-based rap group NWA, a self-loathing acronym for niggas with attitudes. With its vulgar and ultra-violent anti-police rhetoric, the climate was set for mass public acceptance of the community-ravaging anti-crime legislation to follow. Clearly, by deliberate design, the highly publicized, foolish, and self-defeating response coming from so-called gangster rappers to the beating of Rodney King led not to peace, but to a further escalation of the historical Democrat-led assault on the supposed African American people. Prophetically speaking, in our quest as the so-called Black community for, quote, equality, many of us have sought parity with the broader society by fighting for the, quote, civil right to practice as much unpunished lawlessness as the so-called white community, when in fact our goal as a people must be to become a dignified and law-abiding people according to the scriptures and not the traditions of men, whatever their color happens to be. And at the end of the day, as it is written, he who lives by the sword will perish by the sword. And the sad truth is, the sword that's killing the overwhelming majority in the so-called Black community is being wielded by the community itself. Selah. Nevertheless, in light of the new awakening sweeping the world, staunch left-wing supposed African American Democrats en masse are now beginning to look beyond Biden's carefully crafted regular guy from Pennsylvania working class public persona and address the absurdity of Biden's pandering, flip-flopping, and reckless policies. Journalist Roland Martin of Roland Martin Unfiltered lays out the case against Biden's shameless posturing and pandering.
2016, Hillary Clinton got nailed big time by African-American social activists because of her super predators comment, which was in defense of the 1994 crime bill. All the people kept criticizing her and her husband, President Bill Clinton, who signed that into law. Yet during the campaign, I kept trying to tell people, why is it that y'all are ignoring the very guy who wrote the crime bill, Obama's then Vice President Joe Biden? It never came up, frankly, when Obama picked him to be his vice president. But now Joe Biden is running for president, and it is now getting some renewed attention. Well, one of the issues is that Joe Biden is also defending the 1994 crime bill. Now he's also taking some heat. So first off, we're going to show you this video do we have the video, folks, of Joe Biden actually defending the crime bill? All right, so we don't have that video. I'm going to try to find it on my iPad, but it really was a trip to hear Joe Biden. It was at an event where they were outside, and he was asked about it. Now, it's interesting because previously Joe Biden talked about it having an impact with regards to the crime bill. But then all of a sudden now he backtracked. Well, now he's out saying, hey, it had no issue. It did not have an impact on mass incarceration at all. And again, he knows this is going to be an issue. So therefore, he is now defending it. And so I'm trying to find that video while we are here. And so here is the video. I think I found it. I believe I found it, of Joe Biden speaking there. This is a short clip. I'm going to play a longer clip, but here's a short one.
Nationally beat the NRA. Because when we did the crime bill, everybody talks about the bad things. Let me tell you about the good thing in the crime bill. It's the one that had the assault weapons ban, a limited number of bullets in a clip. It made sure that cop killer bullets, Teflon bullets, weren't available any longer. It opened up the whole effort to make sure there's background checks for the first time in American history. Folks, let's get something straight. 92 out of every 100 prisoners behind the bars are in a state prison, not a federal prison. This idea that the crime bill generated mass incarceration, it did not generate mass incarceration. The only bill, that bill had $30 billion. $10 billion went to making sure there was that it was for prevention. That's what it was about. Secondly, the court, I made sure there was a setup in that law that said there were no more mandatories except two that I had to accept. One was that President Clinton wanted 3 strikes and you're out. It was part of this entire bill that included the Violence Against Women Act, included the gun control efforts, as well as included, anyway, I won't go, it's raining. But here's the deal. What happened is the mass incarceration occurred by the states setting mandatory sentences. What happened was, if you go back and look, the Black Caucus supported the bill. The reason why the Black Caucus supported the bill is because we made sure, I had a study done by my staff, and we found out, I remember Judge, you and I talking about this. The fact of the matter is that the vast majority of people for a first-time offense, if they were black, they went to jail 3 times as long as of a white. For example, it used to be 0 to 13 years for robbery. We went into every major of the 10 circuit court districts. What were the sentences given to people who, if you're a white guy and you committed robbery the first time, you got, if memory serves me, between 1 and 3 years. If you're African American, got between 7 and 9 years. So we set up the same crime, same time for the same crime.
In perhaps the greatest irony of the 2020 election season, the reversal of the devastating crime bill of 1994, rather than coming from its author, has come through the First Step Act, a sweeping bipartisan prison reform bill signed into law last December by President Trump, Biden's assumed opponent as the eventual Republican nominee. The new bill accomplishes major turnarounds from the draconian and racist measures set forth by Biden, including making retroactive the reforms enacted by the Fair Sentencing Act of 2010, which reduced the disparity between crack and powdered cocaine sentences at the federal level, taking several steps to ease mandatory minimum sentences under federal law by expanding the safety valve that judges can use to avoid handing down mandatory minimum sentences. And perhaps most importantly, abolishing the three strikes rule so people with three or more convictions, including for drug offenses, automatically get 25 years instead of life. While Joe Biden sticks to Democrat orthodoxy by attempting to co-opt the so-called black vote through posturing and empty promises with no actual history toward our community other than bringing hurt and misery, President Trump is delivering hope and real progressive change to the supposed African American people. Take a look.
Today, I'm thrilled to announce my support for this bipartisan bill that will make our community safer and give former inmates a second chance at life after they have served their time. So important. And I have to tell you, I was called when I announced and when we all announced together this news conference by some of the toughest, strongest law enforcement people, including politicians, by the way, who are so in favor of it. And I was actually surprised by some, like as an example, Mike Lee and Rand Paul and others. No, it's got tremendous support at every level. It's really great. And we're all better off when former inmates can receive and re-enter society as law-abiding, productive citizens. And thanks to our booming economy, they now have a chance at more opportunities than they've ever had before. It is true. Our economy is so strong that when people are getting out of jail, they're actually able to find jobs. And I have 3 instances of companies that hired people coming out of prison, and they are so thrilled by the performance of these people. And now they're doing it more and more and more. And a lot of people are seeing this. It's great. They wouldn't have had the opportunity, frankly, except for the fact that the economy is so strong. And our job market is the lowest and best it's been in over 50 years and seems to be getting even better. Our pledge to hire American includes those leaving prison and looking for a very fresh start, new job, new life. The legislation I'm supporting today contains many significant reforms, including the following. First, it will provide new incentives for low-risk inmates to learn the skills they need to find employment, avoid old habits, and follow the law when they're released from prison. These incentives will encourage them to participate in vocational training, educational coursework, and faith-based programs. And I want to thank Paula White very much, because I know you very much wanted that. Thank you, Paula. That reduce their chances of recidivism and, in other words, reduce their chances of going back to prison substantially. Second, this legislation will allow federal inmates to be placed closer to their home communities in order to help facilitate family visitation. So important, because we know that maintaining family and community ties is key to a successful re-entry into our society. Third, the bill includes reasonable sentencing reforms while keeping dangerous and violent criminals off our streets. In many respects, we're getting very much tougher on the truly bad criminals, of which unfortunately there are many. But we're treating people differently for different crimes. Some people got caught up in situations that were very bad. I give an example of Mrs. Alice Johnson, who served 21 years, and she had, I think, another 25 or so to go. So she would have been in there for close to 50 years for something that other people go in and they get slapped on the wrist, which is also wrong, by the way, which is also wrong. But I'll never forget the scene of her coming out of prison after 21 years and greeting her family, and everybody was crying. Her sons, her grandsons, everybody was crying and hugging and holding each other. It was a beautiful thing to see. It was a very tough situation. Among other changes, it rolls back some of the provisions of the Clinton crime law that disproportionately harmed the African American community. And you all saw that, and you all know that. Everybody in this room knows that. It was very disproportionate and very unfair. We're also proud to have with us on stage 5 more Americans who have been released under the First Step Act and transformed their lives. And that includes Gregory Allen. Where's Gregory? Gregory. Hi,
Gregory. Mine is real short. 2 months ago, I was in a prison cell, and I'm in the White House. Let's continue to make America great again.
That's great.
No comments necessary. Thankfully, with strict new policies coming from the Trump administration, the crackdown on the Hollywood elite and mainstream media abuses is beginning to turn the deep state tide of demonic cultural attacks coming from so-called elite Democrats and their rhino Republican colleagues upon the deplorables and irredeemables, the supposed African American and so-called white Christian communities. Make no mistake, the Great Awakening is no conspiracy theory, but rather a genuine move of the Spirit of Almighty Yah on behalf of His people, the chosen and faithful remnant, the elect from every kindred, tribe, tongue, nation, and people. Hear, O Yisrael, and understand. Our exodus out of the Democrat Party is our exodus out of Babylon. Selah. Toda Rabbah, and thank you for listening.
Until our next report, I'm Yeshua ben Yeshua of the House of David, reminding you to stay vigilant and stay blessed. And remember, it's kingdom time. Shalom.
If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button and bell icon to receive instant notifications from KYCN Radio so you'll never miss new uploads. Enjoy your day, and thanks for watching.